Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe. And today I'm really excited to have my guest, John S. John S., he's been sober since March 7th, 1989. And he's a long-standing member of the Fifth Tradition Group in Atlanta, Georgia. With over 3 decades of recovery, John's life is a beautiful example of what long-term sobriety can look like. Deep, grounded, and joyfully lived. He's been married for 29 years to another sober alcoholic, and together they've raised 3 children. Now retired, John spent his career as a professor of molecular biology and immunology. I'd like some credit for pronouncing those even somewhat correctly.
Duly noted.
Thank you, John. But these days, you're more likely to find him playing guitar, producing music, writing, or spending time with his 5 beloved dogs. John's story is one of service, creativity, and consistency, and we're honored to have him on the Cup of Joe Show. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it.
Hey,
John,
Joe,
how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for those kind words. It's still a little bit odd, honestly, being an alcoholic, and I don't know. Our whole program, right, is about selflessness. So we try not to get into the self-promotion thing. And you hear other people complimenting you; it's still very odd.
Well, I think it's well deserved, and it's I think 38 years is amazing. And so I'm excited to learn how you do it, how you did it, and how you do it. So
excellent. What
was it like growing up, John?
Well, that's a good question. So let me just start off by saying, I live in Atlanta. I live in Stone Mountain, just outside of Atlanta. But I'm from a big, rambling, alcoholic Southern family. I got 7 brothers and sisters, and people always say, "Oh, Irish Catholic, huh?" And I say, "No, alcoholic atheists." And this is kind of, half my family. That describes half my family. The joke in our family is when you shake our family tree, nothing but empty bottles and baggies fall out of it, right? So there's a lot of alcoholism in the family. I grew up one of 8, and like a lot of alcoholics, what I've come to understand is I have an ego disorder, and the way that looks, and alcoholics and addicts are not the only ones who have an ego disorder. Right? We definitely have an extreme version of it, but everybody has it, right? And I grew up like a lot of people, just always feeling not right, uncomfortable, not part of, separate from, and desperately wanting to be able to fit in. And it seemed to me as a kid that everybody else had the playbook to life, that I just didn't get it, And so I remember 6, 7, 8 years old, sitting on the edge of the playground. And I mean, I had friends and I was involved and I was a part of things, but I would sometimes sit there and just watch the other kids and think, how do they do that? How do they just go out and do they think these thoughts that I'm thinking? Like I've always been an overthinker and an underdoer. And so that's kind of how I grew up. And my family, despite the alcoholism, I mean, there's no such thing as a functional family in my experience. Everyone's got their problems and issues, and I came from really a pretty good family. Both my parents were professional folks. My father was a physician. My mother was a nurse, and educated people. And they, I had a lot of opportunities. I went to good schools, and I had, I went to summer camps, and I played sports, and I was a good baseball player and football player as a kid. I was always pretty big and pretty fast. And, so there were lots of things that I could have felt good about. But see, I lack the ability to feel good about a lot of things. Someone made the analogy one day in a meeting, speaker said that alcoholics are, our perspective is like the vulture that's circling over the beautiful valley and the rolling hills and the rivers and the waterfalls and the trees. And all it sees is the carrion in the middle of the road. Like that's sort of the story of my life. I have always been able to see what's wrong and had a very difficult time seeing what's right. So that's sort of how I grew up,
Yeah. What was like your attitude toward drinking and drugs back then? Did you have like any opinions, so to speak?
I did. It's funny you should ask that. So in the 5th grade, I started drinking at the age of 13. Okay. And so 5th grade was not, I was whatever, that was like 11, 12 years old, whatever it is. But I remember there was I grew up in Florida. And at that time, there was a program. There was a wealthy family, and I forget the name, but they had lost a child to drug addiction, an overdose or something. And so they'd started this foundation with the goal of going around to all the schools and educating young people about the dangers of alcohol and drugs. So we had this, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have sat in similar sorts of, classes. So 5th grade, I'm sitting in this class, and this visiting group of people to warn us about alcohol and drugs. And they're going through, this is what alcohol does, and this is what marijuana does, and this is what cocaine does, and this is what LSD does. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, this is fascinating. I can't believe there's like a drug you could take that will make you see things that aren't there or whatever, right? I've always been incredibly curious, particularly about things that I've been warned by the adults around me or the responsible authority figures around me not to do. If you tell me not to do it, it's a damn sure way to get me to do it. It's kind of like later on, the old joke is you want to hide something from an alcoholic, put it in the big book, right? Because they'll never look at that thing. Well, it was kind of like that growing up. And, I was raised in church. My mother, my father's the atheist. My mother was a, pretty devout woman, and she took us to church, and, I went to youth group and Sunday school and all of that stuff. And, got a pretty good, well-rounded education. My wife says if I hadn't gone to Sunday school and all that, I wouldn't be any good at crossword puzzles, because all the clues and things, a lot of times there'll be references to those kinds of things. So, I got a pretty well-rounded education, and but I was always curious. And and I also grew up in a big drinking family. And so every adult, I grew up in the 70s. I was born in 69. So I grew up in the 70s and early 80s. And, my parents entertained a lot. And I never knew an adult growing up that didn't have a cocktail in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and I was always really curious. They looked like they were having fun. There was something going on there. I just, I was shrewd enough, even as a kid, to recognize there was something going on there, and I wanted to be part of that. And so I would have sips off my mom's wine or my dad's beer growing up, watching the football game. Some of my older brothers and sisters, I'd get a sip off their beer. And so I don't remember my first drink. I didn't, but I never got drunk, just a sip, kind of thing. We'd have champagne at Christmas time and stuff like that at the dinner table. And, but my first real experience with it was at 13. And I went out deliberately to get drunk with some older boys in the neighborhood. And I did. I got really drunk. 2 quarts of Mickey's Mean Green Malt liquor. And that was enough. I was about, 13-year-old kid, 130, 140 pounds. By the time I got 1 quart of Mickey's Mean Green Malt liquor in me, I had the experience that really alcoholics have that non-alcoholics don't usually have, which is that I was set free in a way that I did not know was possible up to that point. I was able to come out and play and be myself and, not care about what anybody thought. And once I realized that was possible, it was on. Some people have a pretty prolonged social drinking phase, but you would have to watch. And if you're listening to this, you're going to have to listen real quick to hear that, because it just went right. I went right past that and got drunk that first night. Had a lot of consequences. My last conscious memory before I blacked out that night was sitting in a movie theater and urinating over the seat in front of me and thinking it was the most hilarious thing ever. And my friends thought it was the most hilarious thing ever. But we got chased out of that side door of that movie theater that night. And I just remember before the last memory was just running across that parking lot, trying to zip my trousers up and just laughing uproariously, thinking this was the funniest thing that's ever happened in the history of funny things. And the next morning I woke up and I had thrown up all over my friend's parents' living room, and we were all in trouble. And, everybody was mad at me, which was going to be a pattern that was going to continue. But I was terribly sick and terribly hungover, and But my takeaway from that night was that was the very best night of my life. And when are we going to do that again? That was, so that's how I started. I just came right out of the gates. And, I've talked to non-alcoholics who've had similar sorts of first drinking experiences where they just sort of overshot the mark. And they'll say things that I just 100% to this day don't relate to. Like, I learned that night that I need to really watch my drinking. Like they had a negative reaction to that. And it's understandable. That's a pretty sane reaction. And I have an insane reaction to alcohol, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. I was set free. I was made whole in a way that I had never been. And it was, like I said, it was just on at that point.
Yeah. What, this may sound like a weird question when I asked it, John, but because you said set free, and I'm like, what at that time, do you remember what you were set free from?
Yeah, I could not have put that in words. And it's important for anybody who's relatively new to this, to getting sober and starting this journey, to understand that a lot of the things that those of us who've been here a while say, we're seeing it in hindsight. Because I could not have told you at that time how unhappy I was, how disconnected I was, because it was all that I'd ever known. So, but that's what I realized that night, or so afterwards is, man, it's possible to be completely comfortable in your own skin, not lose. I've always had social awkwardness, lose the social awkwardness entirely. And there's a lot of power in that. If 2-3 drinks completely changes my personality and lets me be free and removes my fear of people and anxiety, social anxiety and all of that, and helps me to fit in and be a part of, I mean, to my way of thinking, why wouldn't you drink? And later on when people, problems for me started mounting up relatively quickly. It was just a weekend thing from that point on for the first year or two. But then it progressed, and I started, smoking weed and popping pills and, doing other things and dropping acid. And, I'm an equal opportunity guy. I like to say, if you got something and it's going to change the way I feel, I'm going to give it a shot. So I was very open-minded, which is very ironic because when I came into AA and I was told I needed to really have an open mind, I had a hard time having an open mind about the steps and the meetings and the sponsors and that. I really had a closed mind about all of that, had some very definite negative opinions about spirituality and, all of this stuff. And so, but I was real open-minded when it came to alcohol and drugs, so.
So did it, I'm kind of get worse in high school? Did it, how did that experience go?
Yeah, it did. So by the time that I was in the 9th grade, so what's that, 16, maybe 16 years old, I was pretty much drinking or getting high or both. I was a mostly both kind of guy. So I was mostly drinking and partying every single day. I would meet my friends early before school, and there was a little wooded area near the school. I would tell my parents things like, "Oh yeah, I'm on the debate team," or I'm on this committee, and we need to get there early and have a little meeting. And so they would, "Oh, John's really turning over a new leaf. He's on the debate team," which I was never on any debate team, by the way. But I'm a good liar. Alcoholics are really good at telling believable lies too, and kind of adding all the little details and nuances that make a story really sink in and sound good. But I would meet my friends half an hour before school in this little wooded area along a golf course near our school. And we would drink and smoke pot and pop pills and get loaded. And so I was 9th grade. I got expelled from the nice school, the last really nice school that I went to, because I was raised in private schools, kindergarten to 8th grade. I went to a private school walking distance from my house that I walked to every day. And then I went to Tampa Prep, which was the really nice upscale college prep school that all the lawyers and doctors' kids went to in Tampa. And kids went there. It was a really good school. And I really, ruined a really good opportunity along with my family name at that school. And I was expelled from there about 5 months into my freshman year. And then I got to go to the degenerate high school where all my friends went, which is where I wanted to be in the first place. And I didn't care one bit about that. I thought it was really kind of cool. I could tell people at the skate park. I was a big skater back in the day, right? I could go to the skate park and tell everybody how I got kicked out of school, and I got a lot of cred, for that. And all I really care about is what other people think of me. I'm totally self-absorbed. I didn't realize that, of course, at the time, but that's what I was. And so, yeah, I got expelled from that one school, ended up at another school. And I pretty much drank and drugged my way through high school. I got arrested a couple of times in high school for possession. I got arrested 2 times in high school smoking pot in exactly the same spot. And we talk about one of the definitions. It's not the definition in my mind, but one of the definitions of insanity is doing the same thing again, expecting different results. And I remember my stepmother just smacking me in the face and saying, "Are you stupid or something? You got arrested there last month in that same spot, smoking pot. Now you're back there smoking pot again and getting arrested again." So, I'm an idiot like most alcoholics, and don't learn from my own mistakes most of the time. And certainly I don't learn from anybody else's. It takes repeated. There's a speaker who I really love named Ralph W. from Los Angeles, California. And he says, and I'll quote him, he says that to get sober, it takes a well-whooped ass. And that's mostly true. And I had to get mine whooped over and over and over and over and over again. But I failed my junior year of high school. And so I was in the middle of repeating my junior year of high school when I quit. I just quit. I decided, I've had enough. And, I came home and told my father, I was living with my father at that time. My folks were divorced, about 10 years before that. So I'm living with my old man. Now, my old man is a Marine. He's a tough bird. He is a self-made guy. He really, the truth is, he's passed away last year. And he was really an amazing man. I never appreciated him. I hated his guts growing up. I never thought he showed up for me, because all I care about is how you show up for me. I don't really worry about how I show up for you. So I had a lot of resentments against my old man. Because he was tough. He was a Marine. He came from nothing. He got into the Marine Corps. He fought in Korea in the Korean War. He came home on a GI Bill. He went to college on the GI Bill, went to medical school on the GI Bill. And he had 5 kids by the time he finished medical school. He had 5 kids living in campus housing with 5 kids. Like, pretty tough stuff, right? Pretty hard to accomplish that with 5 kids, And so, he was a self-made guy, and he started his own business, and he had this huge company, and, he was very successful. And I just thought, well, he didn't show up for me the way I thought he needed to show up for me. So I hated his guts. But he put me out. At that point, I came home and told him I dropped out of high school, and he said, "Well, you can't live here." And I was 18 years old at this point. I'm a high school dropout, a daily drinker, daily pot smoker, daily do anything else that comes along, guy. And so I moved back in, and I was a tough guy. That's the other thing I thought I was pretty tough. I was long hair, long, really blonde Kurt Cobain type hair. I had Kurt Cobain's hair before Kurt Cobain existed. That's the way I like to say it, And I wore all black, like Metallica was my band. So I usually had a Metallica concert t-shirt on, although it might be, Slayer or Death Angel or somebody else. But, I was a heavy metal guy, a skateboard guy. And I fancied myself kind of like a tough, don't really care what society tells me guy. And, so the tough guy like that, when he gets kicked out of his dad's house, he goes home and lives in his mom's basement, because that's what tough guys do. So that's what I did. And my mom is, she's passed on as well. She was a untreated Al-Anon. She had a real tendency to marry alcoholics, and she went through a couple of them, and, hard drinkers and alcoholics. And so she didn't really know how to help me. But she let me live with her. And so I lived with her for a year or so, and stole money from her on a daily basis and pawned her stuff, and just kind of lived and just worked, just odd jobs and just scraped by for about a year. And then I ended up in Gainesville, Florida, ostensibly to go to junior college. They had a junior college there. My mother, again, in her efforts to help me, she kind of helped me get set up in Gainesville, get me into an apartment, get me into a little car. And she said, "As long as you go to school and make a C average, I will help you pay your car insurance and your rent and, and whatever, you got to work. But if you work, as long as you're working and getting a C average in this junior college, I'm going to help you." And I thought that was a decent deal. So I was trying to do that. And I was trying to, everyone had told me what a screw up I was. By this time, I'm the black sheep. I'm, I'm the ne'er-do-well. I'm the train wreck, And so everyone had sort of let me know that in one way or another. And so I'm trying to do better. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to prove to everybody that I'm smart and I'm capable and I'm going to achieve something. And I very rapidly failed to prove that to anybody. Within a couple of months in Gainesville, I was right back to where I ever had been. I was drinking every day, smoking every day, partying every day. I was hanging on to my job because I needed the money, but I wasn't able to get my schoolwork done. And I lived there for about a year. And the last 6-8 months of that year, my pattern was basically this. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be in a panic because I was behind. There were lots of things weighing on my mind. I was behind in school. I was, struggling at the job. I had bills and I had overdo this and overdo that. And I'm going to be evicted. And okay, I'm not going to drink today. I worked in a restaurant. I never, ever tried to quit. A lot of alcoholics tried to quit repeatedly, and I never did. I tried to not drink until 5 every day. That was for half a year. That was my pattern. I didn't see any of this until I got sober, and I got into the big book with a sponsor, and we kind of walked me through, the, the steps. But I would get up with it in panic and say, okay, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to get high until I have gone to school, gone to all my classes, which was 2 classes. And they were very remedial classes. They were like finishing out high school credit type classes, right? So until I've gone to my classes and come home and done my assignments and then gone to work, then I'll go to work. Then I can drink and party at work because I worked in a restaurant. And a lot of your listeners are going to know this. A lot of people work in restaurants, drink and party pretty hard. So that's what I would do. And every day, the same thing would happen. Before noon, I would find myself drunk or high or both. And I would not get to my second class and I would not get the notes that I had said I was going to set out to get from that girl in the first class, from the previous class. And, and then the next day I'd wake up in a further panic because I had all this stuff. Now I had another day's worth of stuff that didn't get done that I needed to get done. And I didn't see any of that, and eventually I just need to take a drink because there's just too much stress on me. And, the only way I know how to relieve stress, to take the edge off, is to take a drink or smoke a joint or pop a pill. So that's what I would do, and it was just really grim. And about this time, my mother, who had gotten into the program of Al-Anon, by this time, and really, I want to just give a shout out to that program because I think I'm sober today because of that program. Because my mother, who used to feel sorry for me and would wire me $200 because I was, my car got booted and I got to get it out of the impound. And, I always have a sob story, for my untreated Al-Anons in my circle. And somebody said, somebody wiser than me said, the alcoholics have a positive genius for finding people to put up with our crap, and my mother was one of those people. And so, but she got into Al-Anon. She stopped doing that. She got a sponsor or somebody telling her, you're killing your kids. Stop sending them $200 whenever you ask for it. So she kind of cut me off and she started talking about, look, if you need help with an alcohol or drug problem, I'm not saying you have one, but if you ever decide you have one, there's this treatment center that so-and-so in the family went to, turned out to be in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's how I ended up here. But so finally, we're about to be evicted from this house. I have this roommate, and my roommate is even a bigger alcoholic than I am. I dropped out in my second junior year. He dropped out in the 7th grade. So he was the kind of guy that I could look at him and feel better about myself kind of guy. A lot of us collect people like that for that reason. And so, but the 2 of us were being evicted from this house. And we had a couple of months behind on the rent, and the water had been turned off, and the gas and the electricity and the phone and all the utilities had been turned off for non-payment. And we were living by candlelight, and our entertainment system was a stereo, a little boom box with stolen batteries from the 7-Eleven. And I think the candles were stolen too. And and to flush our toilet, I had to steal water from my next door neighbor. I had to go in the middle of, late at night, once it's sunset, I would go in the next door neighbor's yard and I would get their garden hose and run it through my bathroom window and fill the tank up because, just because the water's not running doesn't mean your need to use the toilet doesn't still exist. So we were using the toilet all day and then flushing it once a night. It was really a disgusting way to live. But here's sort of the irony of that is there's a line in the big book, that says, in the doctor's opinion, it says that the alcoholic cannot differentiate the true from the false, that I'm delusional. It doesn't talk a lot about denial in that book, but it talks an awful lot about being delusional, which I think is as bad or worse than being in denial. It means I believe things are true that are patently false. And I was patting myself on the back about this water situation and stealing the water to flush the toilet. I really thought, man, I'm a survivor, dude. I'm a creative problem-solving type. I don't just get down when things get bad. I figure out a solution. That was my take at the time on that, which is really crazy, to look back on that now. But about that time, my Al-Anon mother said, you have any interest in going to this treatment center? And since I was being evicted the following week, I did have interest in the treatment center. But I did not go to that treatment center thinking I was an alcoholic or a drug addict or anything else. I went there because they had running water and lights and gas and heat and 3 square meals a day. And this is, 1989. This was before most of the insurance companies came to realize that paying for these long-term stays in these really nice treatment centers does not have a very high success rate. And so I got to stay for 4 months in this really luxurious treatment center here in Atlanta. And they had, they had a nature trail and a swimming pool and a volleyball court and, 6 therapy sessions a day. And, I did not think I was an alcoholic. But the other thing that they had, and this is kind of where my, AA journey begins, or, my 12-step journey begins, is they had people coming in 3-4 nights a week, doing commitments, bringing in a meeting and telling their stories. And so I got to hear in that first month in that rehab, this quote unquote non-alcoholic got to hear about 10, 15 stories of alcoholics. And they were very different people. They were black and white and male and female and straight and gay. And I just identified with these people. They were my tribe. I didn't know I had a tribe until then. And I just loved them. I just thought they were crazy. They were laughing at the most inappropriate. They would tell these tragic, inappropriate stories and then just cackle. And everybody else would cackle. I mean, and I remember in those early days, the first time that I really had just an all-out belly laugh about some alcoholic story and thinking, man, that's the first time that I have laughed like that. And I can't tell you how long. Because the early days of my drinking and partying was a lot of laughs. Some people will say, my worst day sober is better than my best day drinking. And I understand what they mean, but that's not strictly true for me. I had some great times drinking and partying. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have carried on doing it quite so vigorously, I don't think. There was a lot of fun mixed in there. But by the end, I'm trying to kickstart a party that's been dead for a couple of years. And there's no party left. It's just maintenance. I'm just maintaining, myself. And so I was in this rehab and these AA people were coming in and other 12-step programs and, were coming in there. And I fell in love with the fellowship of the program. I did not fall in love with the steps or with a sponsor or with the big book or any of the literature. I fell in love with the fellowship. And and so I got out of there and I went to a sober living and, started going to 7 meetings a week. And I went to 7 meetings a week for the first 3.5 years. Initially things got a lot better, very quickly. Things got a lot better because just not drinking yourself into the ground every day will achieve, you will accomplish some things that you couldn't accomplish otherwise. And I did. I got a job and I got a series of jobs and then I got, some decent jobs and I got back into school and I got my GED and I started in a junior college and was making straight A's. So I have more money than I've ever had. I got more friends than I've ever had because I'm going to 7 meetings a week. And you couldn't have told me that I didn't have a program. I would have told you, how many meetings do you go to a week, dude? And because and that probably the truth is in those years, I probably averaged more like 8 or 10 meetings a week. Because on Fridays and Saturdays, we go to the clubhouse, we go to the 8 p.m. meeting, go eat dinner, come back for the 10 p.m. meeting, go out and shoot pool all night, with the sober crew, or go to some dance club with the sober crew, and we had a lot of fun doing that, But, my story is that eventually I have alcoholism, okay? And it demands to be treated. And I was treating it with fellowship and with psychotherapy and with self-help books and a whole bunch of different things, with exercise. And, I was like in the gym and I was playing a lot of sports, and, I had the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do, as Bill says in his story. And so I had a lot of things going for me. But at 3.5 years sober, when on the outside things were better than they had ever been, I had more money and more friends and acquaintances and stuff. I had a car, I had a great apartment. I had transferred from the junior college over to Emory University here in Atlanta, which is a pretty big university and pretty respectable one. And my parents were just stoked. They thought their kid, hung the moon at this point, So I had love and respect of my family, but on the inside, I was dying, and I was showing up at AA meetings and sharing. I shared in every meeting. I always had something that I felt needed to be said, about whatever we were talking about. I had never worked any steps, but I would go to a step study and they'd be talking about step 7. And I'd say, well, here's what I think about step 7, and I've never worked any steps, but, I've read the 12 and 12, and I've read the big book, and I've read a bunch of self-help books, and I've done therapy for 5 years. And, so I just know everything. And the sad thing about that is that my line of bullshit is so good, because I'm an alcoholic, that people would sometimes come up to me after the meetings and say, God, John, what you shared in the meeting just got me right here, right in the heart, man. I really appreciate that. And then I would say something deep, like, man, you keep coming, bro, because it's going to work for you too. And I'm going home and contemplating suicide every night, at this point, because I'm so like spiritually dead inside. And so luckily for me, about this time, one of the groups that I was going to regularly, there was a guy in that group who I really didn't like, really disliked this guy, actively disliked him. And the reason is because he carried a big book under his arm at every meeting. And he was always quoting the big book, and he was always reading something out of the big book when he shared. And, it says on page 92, it says, and I just thought, will this guy just shut up? But the reality is he was a happy guy. There was something going on with that guy. There was something going on. He was attracted. He had a power of attraction. He had solved a lot of, he would share about, amends that he had made to his family, and how he'd fixed relationships in his life and restored, work situations in his life. And he was clearly doing the deal. And the reason I didn't like him, I realized today, is because he was doing something that I knew I needed to do, but I really didn't want to do. Because look, the 12 steps are terrifying. Okay. When I was new, the idea of a 4th and 5th step with a sponsor was terrifying. The idea of amends, the 9th step, and going back and giving back the money and setting things right with friends and family and, whatever. And the 12th step, I'm going to spend my whole life just helping these pathetic alcoholics. That just sounds awful. I'm very self-centered. I don't really know this about myself at this point, but that's really what I am. I mean, I've really come to believe that my alcoholism is really about ego and self-centeredness. That's my problem. My first thought is always about myself. I jokingly tell, in my home group and my sponsees, I tell them I wake up in the morning with a case of alcoholism, and my first thoughts are generally like, oh, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to take care of these kids. I don't want to talk to that damn sponsee. These are the kind of thoughts that I still have at 36 years sober. And, but my second thoughts, because I'm in AA and I've been trained and had good sponsors, is I hit my knees and say, okay, God, and when I say God, I have no idea what that means, for the newcomers. I am not a church going guy. But I just say God because it's one syllable, and higher power is 4 syllables. It takes longer to say. And I'm lazy and self-centered. But I hit my knees and say, okay, God, one of my sponsors, a man by the name of Jerry, who's passed away now for a couple of years. He was my sponsor for 21 years. And he taught me, You hit your knees and you say, okay, God, this is John reporting for duty. And that's how I start my day off. And then I do my 11-step stuff. But, but I started to get coached up. I asked that guy to sponsor me, that first guy that I hated. And actually, I didn't. I told him that I almost got drunk at 3.5 years sober. That's what happened. I almost got drunk one night. I was at a party that I had no business being at. It was a full-blown alcohol drug party. I just was too cool. I had to be with the cool kids at the cool party. And I almost got drunk. I didn't get drunk. It was a miracle I didn't get drunk. Kind of a last-minute panic. Like I was going to get drunk, and I had a little bit of panic, and I left. And I went to the meeting the next Tuesday and asked this guy, told him what happened. I said, man, I'm 3.5 years sober. And this is really the beginning of what I call my sobriety, because I never picked up in those 3.5 years. Okay. But I was so unhappy. I was steadily going downhill. And I just told this guy the truth. I just said, look, man, I'm 3.5 years sober. I have never worked any steps. I'm totally miserable. I'm thinking about suicide on a regular basis. And I just need help. And he said, hey, I think I can help you. And so I started meeting with him on a weekly basis. And he had a sponsor who had a big book study in his basement. And it was one of these deals. It'd be like 30, 40 guys on a Wednesday night. We would sit in this guy's basement for like 2 hours. It was not an hour-long meeting. It was like however long till we got fed up with till he realized that there was no more alcoholics were going to learn anymore that night. So we'd sit there for like 2 hours. He had one of those 100-cup coffee pots, and we would drink coffee and smoke cigarettes. And it would be like, 4 cigarettes an hour, 3 cups of coffee an hour for 2 hours. And that basement had more smoke in it than a lot of nightclubs that I've been in. And but we would read the big book, and we would listen to Joe and Charlie, old Joe and Charlie's cassette tapes, and they would break the big book down, and we would pause the tape and read that section and talk about it. And then when we got to step 4, we went and wrote inventories. And then we got to step 9, we went and started making our amends and coming back to the meeting and telling each other what had happened when we made amends and stuff. And then and then once we got through the 12 steps, and my first pass through the 12 steps happened from 3.5 to 4 years in that sort of time frame. And at the end of that first pass through the steps, something happened to me. I got fired up. I was very fired up my first year for AA. Really gung-ho. Like I said, I love the fellowship and I love the people. And that was kind of the basis of my sobriety for that early time. And I think that's true for a lot of people, and that's fine. But if you're really an alcoholic, eventually you got to do some spiritual work. And that spiritual work scared me, so I wouldn't do it. But that's what happened to me. I got fired up about AA and the steps and the book and what we are, it's suggested that we do here. And and I got a couple of sponsees, and I got very involved in, just different kind of AA commitments, taking meetings into treatment centers, taking meetings into prisons. My home group was this big active group. And I actually started going to the business meeting at my home group, which was, I would have avoided the business meeting like the plague. And the traditions, forget the traditions. I literally thought the 12 traditions were made up by some alcoholic who had this OCD thing where they came into the meeting room, and on the left side of the podium, there were 12 steps, and we needed something for the right side of the podium, by God. So we'll come up with these 12 tradition things, and that'll be what we have, and it'll balance out the room nicely. And that's what I thought. And so I started learning about service and the traditions and all of that. And so I just started having a new experience. And that's what I needed to have, and that's what my sponsor said, dude, you've been in AA 3.5 years and you need to have a new experience. And that's what I had. I did. Started to have a new experience. And, I just got super involved. I think if there's a message for me about the program, it's this. It's just get involved in everything, in every aspect of it. Just, my life run by me is a disaster. Drunk or sober, I burned my life to the ground with alcohol and drugs, and then I burned it to the ground with 3.5 years sober. I was so crazy. I'll tell you a story. This encompasses about a 2-week period, somewhere around 2.5 years sober. I had been dating this girl. It was a very rocky on and off relationship, like we so often have. And I was going to lots of meetings, and I would give newcomers rides and stuff. I was a good guy, I'll get you, I'll pick you up, bro. And so I had this quote unquote sponsee and newcomer I was trying to help in the car one night. We were driving home from the late night meeting. I got pulled over by the cops for running a red light. And unbeknownst to me, it should have been beknownst, but it was not beknownst. Okay. I had lost my license, I don't know, sometime in the previous year for accumulating too many points and speeding tickets and moving violations. But like a good alcoholic, I move every 6 months, and I never change my address at the DMV. So I never update my driver's license, so I never got the letter that my license was suspended. I should have known anyway, because I could count, how many points if I'd have taken time out to do that, but I didn't. So I had a suspended license, and I didn't know it. So I'm driving on a suspended license with the newcomer in the car, and I get arrested, handcuffed, stuffed in the back of a cop car, taken to jail. And, I remember telling my sponsor that. He goes, dude, you weren't carrying the message. You were spreading the disease in those days, So whatever, I go to jail. It's late at night. I can't get anybody on the phone. I finally get this girlfriend of mine, and she's, just as crazy as I am. And, but we both love drama. So, oh yeah, she's going to come bail me out. So she comes and bails me out. And then that same girlfriend a week or so later tells me she's pregnant, and also that she and I both have chlamydia, and she had been to the doctor, and she had pills for both of us to take to cure this chlamydia. This is the kind of stuff, right? This is my sponsor had to point this out to me later. This is the kind of stuff. This is what an unmanageable life looks like. Because this is John sober, going to meetings, going to school, going to work, making money, with a lot of success in a lot of different areas, and just chaos, especially in relationships, just total chaos, And so that's the kind of stuff that was going on at that time. And then, but like I said, I fell in with these guys. I fell in with a good crew, started doing the program of AA, and really had a profound change begin to take place. About this time, so maybe 4.5 years sober, I was doing service work in the young people's stuff. I was doing a lot of young people's stuff in that day, YPA stuff. And we had the International Convention of Young People in AA was coming to Atlanta in 1994. I was on that committee. And so we were
Tiki Pa.
Yeah, Tiki Pa, all of that. And we went to all of those events, man. Yeah, we did. And I was on that committee. And so one of my jobs was to do outreach. So whenever they were having an event somewhere else in the state, I would have to go to that event and bring flyers and make announcements and all of that. So I drove down to Columbus, Georgia in 1994 to do some outreach at a young people's dance. And I met this little gal at the young people's dance. And we've been married 29 years. So we didn't get together right away, but that's when I first met her at that dance. I'll never forget. And a year later, she was living in Atlanta, and she had moved up here for work, and walked into my home group. And we moved in together about 9 months later, and we've been together ever since. So, and that was not why I went to Columbus on that occasion, but because I was showing up where I was supposed to be showing up, I got hooked up with this wonderful gal who we're happily married. I'd like to report too. We still like each other. We just got back from a trip to the International Convention in Vancouver, British Columbia last weekend. And it was a lot of fun. Yes, I'm hooked up with her, and I finished out college. I got an undergraduate degree in biology. I was thinking at the time that I was going to be a doctor because there's a lot of doctors in the family, and I just made sense. But I decided medicine's not what I want to do. And so I decided to become a scientist, and I ended up in graduate school at Yale University, got accepted there. And so off we went to New Haven, Connecticut. We lived there for 3 years, and I was in school and I was working. We ended up starting a home group up there with some other people from Connecticut, and got this really fun, energetic group going in Middletown, Connecticut. And the primary purpose group of Middletown, Connecticut. So if you're ever in Middletown, Connecticut, that's where you need to go, Mondays and Fridays. And then my boss. So when you're a scientist, you're trainee scientist, what you're really doing is working for an established scientist in their lab and trying to come up with projects that you can do to publish a scientific paper and get a doctoral degree. And so the guy that I was working for was English, and he got this incredible opportunity to go back home to London, England, and set up a laboratory there. And he said to all of us in the group, look, guys, this is what I'm doing. And if you want, you're welcome to come with me and continue your education over there. And so we went back and forth. We had a child. Our first child had been born at this point. It was very, less than a year old. And we were a little nervous about going to another country and healthcare and all of that. But then we decided we'd be stupid not to take advantage of this opportunity. And because I'm sober, I can take advantage of opportunities like that. So we packed everything up and sold the car and sold everything off and moved to London, England, and ended up living in London, England for 4 years. And of course, we hated the AA there, so we started another group. We're real bad to go places and decide they're not doing it right and start a group, my wife and I. So, but we ended up, it was fine. We got a group started and had some sponsees and, and had a good time there. And had 4 very good years in London, England, and made a lot of friends over there. And then finally finished up my doctoral work and got my PhD and came on back to the States, back to Atlanta, Georgia, and I've been here since 2002 and been working. I retired a few years ago at the age of 50. I'm 50. I'll be 56 here in a couple of days. So last 6 years, I've just been retired and doing a lot of AA and doing a lot of, a lot of traveling, sponsor a lot of guys, and they're involved still. We have our local roundup happening here next weekend, the Atlanta Roundup. I was on that committee for 5 years, and I'm no longer on that committee, but I'm still a very big advocate for the roundup. I love conferences. Conferences have been a huge part of my sobriety. We have our local thing here every year. We have the state convention once a year. We have the international convention every 5 years, which we just got back from in Vancouver. It was in Vancouver, British Columbia over July 4th weekend. And we travel around the country, my wife and I. Sometimes we get asked to speak, and so we get to go meet a bunch of new AA people, some other city, and at their little conference. And so now I get to be the guy who stands behind the podium and talks about all this insane stuff that I've just been telling you for the last 45 minutes. It's a pretty miraculous life. When I was a scientist, I was working at Emory University where I went as an undergraduate, and my office door, it said John S. GED PhD, because they asked me what were your degrees, and I told them those were my degrees, and that's what I wanted on my damn office door. So they did it. They put it on my office door, and it's really funny because, it's funny just because who the hell has a GED and then gets a PhD? Not many people, and I want to give full credit for that to Alcoholics Anonymous, because I was a train wreck when I got here, and that you can't get from there to here without something like this divine program of AA. And the other funny thing about that was nobody ever asked me about it. Almost nobody ever asked me about that. Why is that on your door? I think it embarrassed people that didn't want to know that story. The only 2 people who ever asked me about it were both foreigners, and they were like, like this Indian doctor. He's like, John, what is this special degree? You have a very special degree? I'm like, yeah, it's a really special degree, you doc, So anyway, that's kind of funny. So
that's no, I was thinking, John, you said, well, nobody ever asked me about it. And I was just thinking it's because I'm like, that's because we're all selfish, John. We're all selfish.
That's right. I'm sure you're
right.
Too
busy
John.
Thinking about me to ask about you.
Right. We don't have a corner on that market, do we? Every character defect I have, normal people have too. The way my sponsor has explained it to me is we just have extreme versions of these character defects. I'm just, I'm another guy, another human being with all the flaws that everybody's got. I have extreme versions of those flaws, and I self-destruct because of those flaws. I would often be jealous when my sponsor would come down on me or be talking to me about, John, that you really kind of put your foot in your mouth there. You really showed your ass. That was super selfish what you did. And I'd say, well, this other guy, he does exactly the same shit. And my sponsor would say, well, yeah, John, but he's not going to burn himself to the ground with alcohol and drugs because of doing that. And you will. That the reason that I have to cultivate a more spiritual mode of living is because I will die if I don't. And that other guy won't die. He'll just be in one more asshole on the highway. He can cut everybody off in traffic all he wants. and he's not going to drink himself to death over it, but I will, doing that same kind of behavior, or a lot of other behaviors,
Well, I appreciate it. I have to ask you, John, because I told John before we started that my bonus daughter, Emma, when I told her John was going to be on the show, and I said, no. I said, John's got credentials. He's got a GED, PhD. No, I didn't tell her that. But I did tell her that about, you were a scientist. And so she said, all right, John, she had recovery questions for you.
Okay.
So this is a shout out to my bonus daughter, Emma. So are any biological processes or systems that you think represent your story and why?
That is a really deep question. Wow. Any biological processes that represent my story? I mean, I have a pretty gross sense of humor typically. So, of course, the first thing I'm thinking is, taking things in and getting rid of those things, the front end and the back end. There's a process, where we extract what we need from what we take in, and then we get rid of the rest. So, yeah, I think that that is actually probably a pretty good analogy for some of this,
I love it. And actually, I thought this was good. Has your scientific and objective understanding of the body helped you make sense of your addiction?
That's a good question. It's funny because I'm a pretty intelligent person, and I've always been very analytical, even though I didn't ever use it to any good purpose. Like I said, I think at the beginning, I'm an overthinker and an underdoer, and I've always been that way, right? And so in my early sobriety, I read so much about all of that. Right, about addictionology and the various approaches to therapeutic interventions for the alcoholic and the way the alcoholic mind works and drug addicts and addiction in the mind and all of that. And I just never made any progress with that understanding. And then later on, when I went through the big book, there's some stuff in there about self-knowledge doesn't really help the alcoholic. And I think this is the reason why all those years in therapy, I just kind of spun my tires, because I did a lot of therapy, a lot of very willingly in early sobriety. I had a group therapy thing that I did, and I had a personal counselor person that I saw every week and all that for a long time. And I learned an awful lot about, psychology and, emotional, landscape and family of origin and all of these kinds of things. And I know a lot of people do a lot of work in those areas. For me, though, what made the difference was, so I had all this self-knowledge, but I'm not really putting anything into action to change the way that I live my life. When I got into the AA program and to the 12 steps in detail, it was a little different. It was more of, let's take a complete and total assessment, like the fourth and fifth step, right? Let's take a total assessment of who and what you are at this moment and what you're going to do different tomorrow, and let's get a higher power involved in that process. So there's a spiritual aspect that just cannot be, underestimated in all of this for me. Because if thinking your way out of a corner was possible, this is the guy who would have done it. I think I've demonstrated by getting a PhD in molecular biology that I got the mental fortitude and the ability intellectually to grasp and think my way through things. And I grasped and thought my way all the way through graduate school. But when I apply that to myself and to my alcoholism, I made no progress whatsoever. So the spiritual aspect of this deal is profound, because it's, I'm principled. I can forgive everybody, all my resentments and all my judgments about my old life, and what I saw as very unfair circumstances a lot of times that I was put in, and things that happened to me. I can just forgive all those crazy human beings for their outrageous behavior and let them off the hook. And by doing that, I'm letting myself off the hook. Resentments, which is a big part of the inventory as it's, as originally laid out. I never understood this. I always thought it was so stupid, oh, resentments. I'm going to look at my resentments. What? I just thought that was so stupid. And one of my sponsors explained that when I'm holding on to resentments, the way that I hold on to them, which I lie in bed at night and just unconsciously start thinking about people that I hate and people who did things or said things in my life. And I wish I'd have said this to that person. And I should have said that. I have conversations in my head with people who aren't in the room, right? And that's kind of one aspect how resentment looks in my life. But when I have a resentment, I am putting someone in a jail cell and then standing guard outside that door for the rest of my life to tell anyone who walks by what a sorry son of a bitch this person who's in jail was and is, and I am just as locked up as that person is now. When I let them all out, I don't have to be the warder anymore, and that's a profound, I don't know how to get there short of some kind of spiritual, practice, and like I said, it's not religious. And I understand a lot of the new people who might be listening to this would have the same take, the same fear, the same judgment that I had when I was new, because I read the 12 steps on the wall and I'm like, okay, where's the pink pajamas and tambourines, guys? Like, this is a cult. I know it's all about Jesus somewhere in here, right? And I was really happy to be wrong about that, and surprised to learn that, we got very devout religious people in AA and the other 12-step programs, and we've got I'm as close to an atheist as you could be and still believe in God. That's what I like to tell people, right? Like, I don't know what God is. I use the word God freely today. Because I know what I mean when I say it. And I understand. That's why I'm going to such lengths to say all of this, because I understand what I thought when I was new and someone said God. I'm trying to turn my will over to God. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, this is terrible. Where's the exit? Like, this is so stupid. I'm going to go smoke a cigarette in the parking lot. Thank you very much. And that's the guy that I was coming in here. And, but I had a lot of preconceived ideas, old prejudices about things. And I needed to have an open mind, and I did not for a while. I had to be beaten into an open mind in sobriety. And unfortunately, that process of becoming open-minded and being beaten into a state of reasonableness is the phrase that they use in the Big Book, very nearly got me drunk. And I think a lot of people in that sort of 3 to 5 year period, because I'm going to do the bare minimum that gets me by. That's who I am. I'm a path of least resistance guy, but unfortunately the path of least resistance always goes downhill. And, so I slowly went downhill. And I think that 3 to 5 year period, we lose a lot of people because what they were doing was enough to get them by in the first year, second year, third year, but it's not enough long-term if you're really an alcoholic, because my problem is, one, I have a very special and difficult relationship with alcohol. And two is I have this underlying spiritual problem that I'm just so full of self and so full of judgment and so full of resentment and fear. And, until that gets sorted out, I can't have this spiritual awakening that they talk about, in step 12. But to get the spiritual awakening, I have to work the other 11, all 12 steps, It says in step 12, I'll have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Well, that's 12 steps. I was like I was a one-step guy. It's okay, I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict, whatever. I'm coming in here. I'm going to your damn meetings. Let's shut up and give me a cigarette. That was pretty much my whole program. And chasing girls.
One of my favorite things is, and you said it, it's like, it tells us in the 12th step that, having had a spiritual awakening, it tells us we will have one, right. And I was so like, what is this spiritual awakening? I'm not churchy. I don't want this kind of thing. But my sponsor pointed me to, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the spiritual experience. And in that it says, I just need to have a psychic change just enough so I don't have to take a drink today. That's it. That's what it is.
That's right.
According to what's written in the book. So I think you've, and I love that you use God as a term, not as, there's no description for you. And that's exactly what, we're taught is it's, as I understand, not as anybody else does.
Exactly. And that's one of the great freedoms. We're given that freedom because, like I said, I was raised in church, and you had to believe a lot of very specific things in the church I was raised in to be a member of that, sect. And and it wasn't heavy duty stuff for a lot of people, but it was for me. I couldn't buy that. I couldn't buy that package. But
for
thankfully,
sure.
I could buy the AA package.
And I'm certainly glad you did, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your story.
My pleasure.
But I can't let you go, John, without doing our rapid fire questions.
Fire away.
No pressure. I know he's been preparing for this for 38 years.
36.
Yeah, 36. Sorry, John. Sorry.
Actually, I'd have been 38.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
Because even before I got sober, I would overthink stuff like this. Yeah. I'm going to try not to overthink it.
Listen, I'm not good at math. I'm not good at math. But all right, John. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
I don't know that I have a favorite slogan. Live and let live is probably a pretty darn good one, though. And actually, I've come to like the slogan think, 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 which I did not like for many years because I would tell you, look, I can't trust my thinking. I don't think well. I have a thinking problem, right? But the think, think, think slogan, if you read step 11 in the big book and underline the number of times it says, we think about the 24 hours ahead. We think, what does God want us to do? We ask God to mold our thinking and, direct our thinking and direct our thoughts. So it's not that my thinking is fundamentally the problem. It's the way that I think. I don't think much about things I should be thinking about. And I obsess about a whole lot of things that I shouldn't. But spiritually directed, meditation is just thinking. And if I'm a kind of a thoughtless guy in the classic definition of that word, thoughtless, I don't think about what's coming up in my life. I'm the guy who misses the anniversary or the birthday or the whatever, because I'm just sort of going through my life and not really thinking about other things or other people. But when my thoughts are directed in that way, and I will think, okay, what is it? Well, it's July 14th. I have a younger brother whose birthday is tomorrow. I'm aware of that today. That's the kind of stuff I would not have been aware of before. So thinking properly and think is actually good. I would have told you 10 years sober. That's a terrible slogan,
I hear you. So what's your least favorite recovery slogan?
I don't know that it's a recovery slogan per se, but you hear people say a lot of time, this is a selfish program. And I really don't like that, because I understand some people like, I have to put my recovery first, which means sometimes I have to do things, that I have to not do certain things so that I can go to the meeting or I can do the commitment. Okay, if that's the way you mean it, then I understand it. But the reality is everything that I do in the program is all about becoming selfless. Right? That I am already a selfish person. I am profoundly selfish. I say this, I'll go ahead and say it. It's very anonymous the way we're doing this, but I tell my sponsees this: 95% of my thoughts are about my dick and my wallet and what do you think of me? That is self-centeredness. That is what my self-centeredness looks like. And I'm happy to report that 95% of my thoughts are not that anymore. That because I've been directed and sponsored and, kind of coached into this deal. A lot of my thoughts are about my family and my kids and my wife and my home group and my sponsees and my sponsor and my local committee and how they're doing. And, whatever. I'm very selfish still. My default position is selfish, right? But through this set of actions, that the 12 steps, I have become a much less selfish person. And I think the whole goal is to take people like alcoholics. The program's goal is I'm a taker. And over time, through this process, I become a giver. And that is the journey, right? Is going from a taker to a giver. And the giver can always revert back to a taker, but we can always come back to the basics and just get back into the steps and become a giver once more. And then there's a joy in giving. I've got sponsees that blow my mind, guys that I would not have given 5 cents for their odds of staying sober on day one, who are 15, 20 years sober and have families and careers and sponsees and children. And, that's a miracle just to watch that. The joy of that is profound.
They tell us you will not want to miss that, for sure.
You will not want to miss it. Don't miss it, guys.
Yeah. What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
Judgment. I form judgment so fast, and it's connected to self-centeredness, right? Because if I'm in judgment over anything, it makes me feel better about me temporarily. Like I'm better than that person. I would never do that, And that's really the pot calling the kettle black, because I'm the most selfish, judgmental. If you catch me, I'm glad there's no justice. Okay. There's no justice in the world, in the spiritual world, right? Because if I got what I deserved for the way that I've lived and the way that I've behaved, they'd throw me under the jail. I've avoided so much justice, just by pure luck or the grace of God, or however you want to call it. But so that's my superpower.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Just do everything. Just do everything in the program. Show up for all of it. The meetings, the workshops, the retreats, the conferences, the general service stuff, committees, local events. It's really funny. I was talking with somebody this other day. I'm not on social media. I've just never been, I have so much communication with the world between my telephone, and my email and just a few things, texts, emails, and phone calls. I'm kept busy all day long with just that. So I've just never been on social media. And in my phone, there are 1,600 contacts. And I'm on a first name basis with 1,600 people. And probably 90% of that 1,600 people on my phone are AA members or members of other 12-step groups, that I'm connected to. And I might not hear from someone for 10 years. And they call me up. They're still on my phone, bing, hey. So the result of being active in service at all those different levels is that I just had this huge life. I had such a small life when I got here. I had one friend, and I didn't like that friend, and he didn't like me, but we were roommates. That was all. That was it. And today I got 1,600 people on my phone, and a lot of them are very close friends who would show up for me and have shown up for me when the chips were down, and I show up for them.
That's really cool. What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
Country Roads. I'm a guitar player, and that's one that, I played, some of the younger people listening to this won't appreciate this quite so much, but growing up, I grew up pre-internet, pre-cable. We had 3 television channels, and if we were driving in the car on a long trip, there'd be long stretches of that drive where there'd be no radio stations that the car could pick up. And so my old man or my mother, they would often sing songs. And that was one of the songs they used to always sing is Country Roads Take Me Home, by John Denver. And so I learned to play that on the guitar. And I was, I got to sing it both at my mother's funeral and at my father's funeral. And all my brothers and sisters sang along, and then everybody else would join in. And so it's a really meaningful, simple old timey song for me. And but now it's got all these associations. So that's one of them, but sometimes it's, any heavy metal from the 1980s is what goes on in the radio.
I was waiting on the Metallica to come in.
Yeah.
If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
One wish to help whose recovery?
To help with your recovery, what would it be?
Just continued willingness. One of my sponsors, Jerry, who's dead now, he used to say, and I really love this, he used to say, John, the only thing that you can bring to the table in this program is willingness. because everything else is here. We've got the meetings, and we've got the literature, and we've got the sponsors, and we've got the big book, and we've got the old timers, and we've got the conferences, and we've got the workshops and the retreats and all the stuff. Just bring the willingness. That's what you need to bring, and I have clung to that because I don't always want to go to the meeting. I don't always want to go meet that sponsee or do a fifth step. Fifth steps are really a challenge, when you're a sponsor. You got to find, a big block of time that you can set aside and really listen to somebody and kind of go through that process. Sometimes it takes more than one sitting to get through an entire fifth step. And especially when my wife and I had 3 young children in the house, it was challenging. She'd have a sponsee and she'd say, I got to do a fifth step sometime this weekend, which meant I had to look after the kids for 4 or 5 hours while she was down in the basement doing a fifth step. And she did the exact same thing for me. And so that's one of the ways that I show up, and have to have the willingness to do that. And I've had good sponsorship, So if I have a wish for myself, it's to continue to be willing and to continue to be sponsorable, to be willing to go. Even at 36 years sober, I have a sponsor. I call my sponsor. I say, man, let me run something by you. And then if he has a suggestion, I'm going to do it because I'm not in charge of my life anymore. And that's why I have a sponsor.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. What step do you love the most?
It'd probably be a toss-up, honestly, between 4 and 5, right? Because the first time that I ever did a thorough 4th step and then did the 5th step with my sponsor, and the truth is, like I was talking, that was about just before I had 4 years sober, and I was in a pretty bad place, and I did this inventory. And I didn't think it was a particularly good or thorough inventory. And looking back, I know it was not as thorough as it might have been. But it was the best and most honest that I had been up to that point. And some profound realizations about me came out of that inventory, about my self-centeredness that I just did not believe up to that point. And that was a big deal to see that for the first time. And that kind of set me on my path. But really, it's 12 because I sponsor a bunch of guys. I probably sponsor 20 guys today. And most of those 20 guys are sober a long time, at least a few years. And so it's not like they're calling me every single day. We've been through the steps and they're now sponsoring guys and doing their 12th step. And, but I've always got a few new guys in the book, like I got a couple guys right now that we're meeting once a week and reading the big book, going through steps. And to watch those guys go from the profound screw ups that they were when I first met them to like reasonably sane. And I say reasonably sane because we're insane. Okay. We are insane. And if you're sitting out there, you're insane. Understand that we take crazy in this program. We take crazy all day long. As long as you're willing, you're going to get better. You're going to be crazy during the process for a while. And in some ways, probably for a long while, because there's areas that I struggle in, but the 12th step and seeing guys get sorted out and seeing them go on to help another guy, and sometimes that guy now going on to help another guy. And that goes all the way back to Bill and Bob, and our original co-founders of all of AA and then all the subsequent 12-step programs, It's really profound that a couple of, a failed broker and a failed proctologist, who were both totally insane, cobbled this thing together. And helping others was the keystone of everything they did. So 12 step is huge.
What step do you love the least?
Amends. I don't like making amends. I'll tell you a funny story. Because this is an ongoing thing, right? We got to keep living this. We got to keep doing it. I was 32 years sober. So that's 4 years ago. So I came home one day. I have a neighbor here who next door who I'm not close with. I don't know her terribly well. But I walk my dogs. I have 5 dogs, and I walk my dogs around the neighborhood at night. And she'll come out in her yard with 2 dogs that are not on leashes. And I've got my dogs on leashes, and they come running out in the street, barking and yapping and carrying on. And I have just a job to restrain my dogs. And now my dogs are barking and yapping, and the whole neighborhood's getting woke up. And I'm like, and I asked her, over a period of a year or so, could you just put your dogs on a leash? I really think it'd just reduce this whole deal and make it a lot easier. And they never leave the yard. I'm like, what do you mean they never leave the yard? They're in the street while you're saying that. I mean, barking their full heads off. And so we'd had this conversation half a dozen times. So one day I come home, cut forward, 6 months. I come home, I'm driving. I have to turn right into my driveway. She is one house, before I have to turn right into her driveway, right before my driveway. And I'm kind of slowing down. I'm not going more than 5 miles an hour, getting ready to turn in my driveway. And one of her dogs runs out of her yard, and I ran it over. And I love dogs. Okay. I got 5 dogs. I'm a big dog guy. And I slammed on the brakes, and I jumped out of the car, and I said, "Oh my God." And she comes running out. She's like, "It's okay. It's okay. He went right under the front and right out the side." He's a little dog, He missed the tire. He's okay. He's okay. And so I had this huge wash of relief, go over me, followed by just instantaneous rage. And I just cussed this woman out up one side, down the other. I just let her have it, man. And then I got back in my car, and I got a manual transmission. So I just over revved it, dumped the clutch, spun all 4 tires. It's an all wheel drive, laid rubber down. So, my car's smoking. I pull into my driveway, and I go in the house, and I slam the door like a total insane person. A few minutes later, my wife comes home. She says, "Baby, I think your car's burning up or something. The garage smells like burnt rubber." And I said, "No, your husband's burning up. Here's what happened." And I told her. She just, of course, laughed at me. She thought it was hilarious, that I had gone off. And she says what we always say to one another, which is, "Okay, baby, a vision for you." And so, I called my sponsor, and I said, "Here's what happened." And he said, "Well, I think you owe an amends to your neighbor, don't you? 32 years sober, you drop F-bombs and C-bombs and MF bombs on your next door neighbors, probably not in, particularly spiritual behavior." And so I had to go and make amends to her and apologize for talking to her like that. And, so making amends, I don't like making amends because I have a big ego, and I don't like to be wrong. And I don't like to admit that I was wrong, and much less try to set things right with people. But it's a necessary thing. And my big fat ego needs to be beat down sometimes. And so anyone sitting out there and having a bad day did something really foolish like that, understand. I did that at 32 years sober. And so, we still make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes, and we have the tools to set them right and then move on. And I don't have to do that again. I haven't done it again since then. So
that's the truth. We have the tools now to set those things right. I have to ask John, is she putting the dogs on a leash now or no?
I tell you, the irony is she put them on a leash. She was walking them on a leash for a minute. And I thought, well, maybe that's how God's will gets done, right? I make a mistake, and I set it right to the best of my ability, and now she's doing the leash. But that lasted about a week, and she doesn't do it. So I guess I was wrong about God's will or whatever.
What do we know?
What do we know?
So what is one of your favorite movies?
There's an awful lot of them. So recently, it's not that recent actually, but the movie Limitless. I don't know if you saw that. It's about a guy who gets a hold of this illegal drug that basically expands his brain, and he becomes this superpower guy. Not superpower, just hyper intelligent, and But of course, just being super intelligent doesn't really fix everything. It causes a lot of problems. But it's a really I somehow missed that movie. I think it was it's pretty old now, 2011, 2013, something like that. But I miss a lot of movies. I missed an awful lot of movies and television for a good, when you raise 3 children, you just are, there's a stretch of years in there where you're just really busy and you don't get to see a lot of that stuff. And so people will say, "What? You've never seen Limitless? God, you got to see that. You would love that." And so I just watched that recently, and I did. I really loved that movie. Really good movie.
Well, that's good. That's the nice thing about it. When you miss them, now they're new to you.
That's right.
So
That's
you're
right.
good. And finally, John, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrived at the pearly gates?
What would I want to hear God say? You were willing. Good job. Which is what my sponsor would say to me sometimes when I would show up, despite kicking and screaming and complaining that I shouldn't have to do something or shouldn't have to take such a commitment or shouldn't have to do this piece of service because I have 3 kids and whatever. He'd say, nah, I think you'll figure it out. And he'd say, good job. You were willing. So
I like that. Well, I appreciate you being willing to do the show today, John, and taking the time, man. It means
my pleasure.
a lot. And
it's been interesting.
Well, thanks for sharing your experience, strength, and hope. And for the rest of our folks, please subscribe to our friends at the dailyponderables.com, your recovery source for inspiration and encouragement every day. A new episode of The Cup of Joe Show is released every Thursday at noon. Visit thecupofjoeshow.net, or you can listen to the show in your favorite podcast apps, Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." Please like, follow, subscribe, and share because someone out there needs to hear this today. Have a great day, everybody.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience, strength, and hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to The Cup of Joe Show.